For 18 years, he sat across from investigators, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and television cameras, and he denied it. He denied it in Aruba. He denied it in the Netherlands. He denied it from a maximum security prison in Peru, where he was already serving time for killing a second woman. He gave interviews in which he described himself as innocent. He changed his story so many times and in so many different directions that the inconsistencies themselves became a kind of evidence, a catalog of contradictions that investigators kept adding to year after year, knowing exactly what it meant and being unable to do anything about it. And then, on October 18, 2023, in a federal courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, Joran van der Sloot stood before a judge and finally admitted that he had killed Natalee Holloway, that he had bludgeoned her on a beach in Aruba, that he had pushed her body into the ocean and walked home, that he had done all of it in 2005 when she was 18 years old and he was 17, and that he had spent the following 18 years lying about every detail of it to every single person who asked. Her mother, Beth Holloway, was sitting in that courtroom. She had been waiting for that admission for longer than her daughter had been alive. But before we get to what happened in Birmingham, you need to understand what those 18 years actually looked like. Because the road from that beach in Aruba to that federal courthouse is unlike anything else in the history of American criminal cases, and the full weight of October 18th only lands when you understand everything that came before it. May 26, 2005. Natalee Holloway and approximately 124 classmates from Mountain Brook High School in suburban Birmingham, Alabama, arrived in Aruba for a 5-day graduation trip. Natalee was 18 years old. She had just completed high school with honors. She had been accepted to study pre-medicine at the University of Alabama on a full academic scholarship. By every account from the people who knew her, her teachers, her coaches, her friends, the neighbors who had watched her grow up, she was exactly the kind of person you hope your children will become. Disciplined, genuinely warm, deeply loved by her family and her community, and by the friends who would spend the rest of their lives unable to fully process what happened to her. The trip to Aruba was a celebration of everything she had worked toward. It was the last time anyone outside of that island would ever see her alive. On the night of May 30th, the final evening of the trip, Natalee and several classmates went to a bar called Carlos and Charlie's near the waterfront in Oranjestad. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, her classmates watched her leave. She was getting into a car with 3 young men. One of them was a 17-year-old Dutch national named Joran van der Sloot, who had grown up on the island and was attending the International School of Aruba. The other 2 were brothers named Deepak and Satish Kalpoy. The car drove away. When the group assembled at their hotel the following morning to catch the flight back to Alabama, Natalee was not there. Her friends waited. They searched the lobby. They asked the hotel staff. They alerted local police. The search that followed was large-scale, internationally covered, and ultimately produced nothing. Natalee Holloway was never found. The investigation in Aruba moved quickly in the first weeks and then stalled in a way that would define the next 2 decades. Van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers were arrested within 2 weeks of the disappearance. They were questioned at length. They were released. Van der Sloot's initial account to investigators was that he had been with Natalee that night but had left her on the beach alone and that she had been alive and conscious when he walked away from her. He later changed that account in significant ways, then changed it again. Over the months and years that followed, he gave at least 3 substantially different versions of what had happened on that beach, each one inconsistent with the previous ones in ways that investigators documented and could do almost nothing with in court. In one version, he claimed she had suffered a drug overdose and that a security guard had helped him deal with the body. In another, he described her dying from a fall. In a third, he implied that other people had been involved and that he was protecting them by staying silent. None of those versions aligned with the physical evidence. None of them aligned with each other. He was arrested again in 2007 on new grounds and released once more, this time after a judge found the evidence still insufficient under Aruban law. Each arrest followed the same pattern: questioning, detention, release, changed story. The evidentiary bar under Aruban law was higher than what investigators could consistently clear, and the case kept collapsing at the same point every time it was rebuilt. Vandersloot walked free repeatedly, and Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway, who had moved to Aruba during the first weeks of the search and spent years organizing pressure campaigns, attending press conferences, and sitting in the offices of government officials in 2 countries asking them to do more, watched every single one of those releases with the specific kind of grief that comes from being unable to prove to the relevant authorities what you already know with absolute certainty. The years between 2005 and 2010 were not quiet for Beth Holloway, even as the investigation in Aruba appeared to stop moving. She appeared on national television repeatedly to keep the case in public attention, understanding that visibility was one of the few tools still available to her. She wrote a book about what she had lived through. She gave speeches across the country. She established the Natalee Holloway Resource Center at the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington. She worked directly with members of Congress on legislation designed to make it easier for American families to receive State Department assistance when a family member disappears in a foreign country. She became, entirely against her will and through no choice of her own, one of the most recognizable advocates for missing persons families in the United States. Throughout all of it, she maintained without qualification that Joran Vandersloot had killed her daughter. She said it when he was released the first time in Aruba. She said it when he was released again in 2007. She said it when he appeared in photographs at a poker tournament in Australia, living his life without apparent consequence, more than 3 years after Natalee had last been seen getting into his car. She never stopped saying it. And the reason she never stopped is the same reason it is now documented in a federal court transcript. She was right. She had been right from the first morning Natalee did not come home. The investigation simply could not yet prove it. But something was about to happen in 2010 that would eventually lead, 13 years later, to a courthouse in Alabama, through a sequence of events that no one who had been following the case for 5 years could have anticipated. In March of 2010, Vandersloot contacted Beth Holloway through an intermediary. He told her he knew where Natalee's remains were located and that he would provide that information in exchange for $250,000, $25,000 up front, with the remainder to follow once the remains were confirmed. Beth Holloway, working directly with the FBI, agreed to the terms as part of a sting operation constructed specifically around this contact. The $25,000 was transferred. Vandersloot provided a specific address in Aruba where he claimed Natalee's body could be found. Investigators went to the location. There was nothing there. The address was false. He had taken the money, manufactured a location he knew was wrong, and disappeared. Then, on May 30th, 2010, exactly 5 years to the day that Natalee Holloway was last seen alive, Vandersloot was in a hotel room in Lima, Peru, where he met a 21-year-old woman named Stephanie Flores at a casino and murdered her later that night. He was arrested in Chile 4 days later, extradited to Peru, convicted of Stephanie Flores' murder in 2012, and sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian maximum security prison. Meanwhile, a federal grand jury in Alabama had already indicted him in July 2010 on extortion and wire fraud charges related to the money he had taken from Beth Holloway. Those charges could not be acted on while he was serving a prison sentence in Peru. The indictment sat. Beth Holloway waited. 13 more years passed. Every single one of those years, he was alive and existing in the world, in a prison cell, but alive. While Beth Holloway remained in courtrooms and conference rooms and television studios, asking the same question she had been asking since the day her daughter did not come home. What happened to Natalee on that beach in 2005 is something Vandersloot finally described in the court filings accompanying his 2023 guilty plea, entered into the record in Birmingham on October 18th. According to his account, submitted to prosecutors as part of the plea agreement, he and Natalee were on the beach together after leaving the bar. He said she refused his sexual advances. He said he picked her up. She demanded to be put down. He threw her to the ground. Her head struck a rock and she lost consciousness. He then found a cinder block nearby and struck her in the head with it. He walked into the ocean until the water reached his knees and pushed her body in. Then he walked home. The judge who accepted the guilty plea, Anna Manasco, addressed him directly in the courtroom before issuing her ruling. She told him he had brutally murdered 2 young women in separate incidents, years apart, in different countries, both of whom had refused his sexual advances, and that both of them had deserved to live full lives. The room went silent in the specific way courtrooms go silent when what has been said inside them cannot be undone. Beth Holloway was present. She had been waiting to hear something close to that sentence for 18 years. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had lasted since 2005. But here is the detail in this case that does not fully register for most people when they first read the 2023 coverage. The detail that reframes the entire 18-year period in a way that is genuinely difficult to process once you understand it clearly. In 2010, when Vandersloot contacted Beth Holloway and offered to tell her where her daughter's remains were, he was not acting out of guilt. He was not reaching out because carrying what he had done had become too heavy. He was running a transaction. He was monetizing a murder he had committed and denied for 5 years. He took $25,000 from the mother of a girl he had killed, told her the information he was selling was genuine, and gave her an address he knew was entirely fabricated. He knew exactly where Natalee was because he was the only person who had ever known. He took her money. He gave her nothing real in return. 3 weeks later, he flew to Peru and murdered another woman. The judge in Birmingham specifically described the extortion and wire fraud charges as heinous not primarily because of the dollar amount, but because the person constructing and selling this transaction had himself produced the grief he was then exploiting. The market Vandersloot had identified was a mother's need to find her daughter. The product he offered was a lie he had built specifically to extract money from that need. And the confession that came in 2023 did not arrive because he had decided the truth deserved to be known. It arrived because telling a bounded, legally constrained version of the truth was the price negotiated as part of a plea agreement designed to limit his additional criminal exposure in the United States. The plea agreement contained a provision that frustrated many of the people who had followed this case since 2005. Federal prosecutors agreed, as part of the deal, that Vandersloot's confession regarding Natalee's death could not be used against him in any future criminal prosecution for her murder. He admitted to killing her. That admission is in the filed court documents. It is in the official transcript of the October 18th hearing. It is part of the permanent public record of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Alabama. But the legal terms of the agreement mean the confession itself is not usable as evidence in a murder prosecution in Aruba or anywhere else. The Aruban prosecutor's office stated after the hearing that the investigation into Natalee's disappearance remained technically open and that they would follow up on any credible new information. Legal analysts who reviewed the agreement were largely skeptical that a murder charge could be successfully pursued. The body has never been found. Physical evidence from the beach in 2005 is either degraded beyond use or was never properly collected at the time. The confession, for all the weight it carried in that courtroom, is very likely the only formal legal accounting Natalee Holloway's family will ever receive for what happened to her. It is not a murder conviction, but it is a sworn admission in a federal court from the man who killed her that he did, and that admission will remain in those files permanently. Beth Holloway spoke to reporters on the steps of the federal courthouse in Birmingham immediately after the hearing ended. She said Joran Vandersloot was no longer the suspect in her daughter's murder. He was the confirmed killer. She told him directly, inside the courtroom before she left, that she wanted him to hear the jail door slam shut every single time it closed for the rest of his life. She said that for 18 years he had denied killing Natalee, and that now he had finally admitted in open court that he had. She said as far as she was concerned, it was over. Natalee Holloway was 18 years old when she died on a beach in Aruba on the last evening of a graduation trip. She had a scholarship to study medicine. She had her entire life ahead of her. She had a family that spent 20 years refusing to allow what happened to her to be filed away as something permanently unresolved. The person who killed her lived for 18 years after that night. He lived in Aruba, in the Netherlands, and in a Peruvian prison where he reportedly married in 2014 and where other inmates reportedly attacked him more than once after the full extent of his history became widely known inside the facility. He had 18 additional years of existence that Natalee did not have. On October 18, 2023, in a federal courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, he said out loud the thing Beth Holloway had been saying publicly since the morning her daughter did not come home. What the hearing produced was a record, a transcript, his words under oath in a room where witnesses were present to hear them. Beth Holloway said it was over. The official record says it was. Whether that is the same thing as justice or only the legal outline of it is the question this case leaves permanently open.